Hello everybody, good evening, and thank you so much for coming out on this drizzly November evening for the launch of Starshot by Mary-Ann Constantine, which is anything but drizzly. It looks beautiful, it is a beautiful book, and obviously I would say that because I'm the editor. My name's Penny Thomas, I'm the fiction editor with Seren. We publish 6 or 7 novels per year. It's my great pleasure that we're publishing this one this November today. I've been told I've got to say a very brief introduction, very underlined, so I'll be very brief. But Mary-Ann, who you know probably lives nearby, works at the university. She already has 2 collections of short stories to her name. This is her first novel. We've put a novel on the front, not just for the reader's benefit, but I think for Mary-Ann's, because I think to this day she doesn't quite believe that she's actually written a novel. Even yesterday, in an email to me, she referred to it as The Thing. Tell them about The Thing. Well, it's here and it's real. What can I say about it very, very briefly? I love Mary-Ann's writing. I love the short stories. I think this Love Life was a short story which kept on growing.
Yeah, I thought it was a short story.
Involved more and more people. Her writing is exquisite. It's tender. It's resilient. It's playful. It's very serious. It's from the opening scene. The opening scene is all set in and around Cardiff Museum. I don't want to give too much away here, but it's good. It's basically set around the museum. So right from the first moment where you have a young woman with her back to the museum, a copy editor, in fact. The museum, the book always takes you where you least expect to go. Suddenly you're in the city's parks with a young dad, with his toddler son. You're in a hospital, you're in a pond, you're by a pond on a hillside outside of Cardiff somewhere. You're in the flat of a cleaner. I'm going to forget where she's from. Is it Syria? Syria, yeah, asylum seeker, seeking asylum, place of safety in Cardiff, as so many people probably are. In fact, all the characters in this novel really are seeking some sort of place of safety. And slowly, beautifully, connections appear between them as connections appear in the paths around the city. I think we've mentioned psychogeography on the back. I don't know how good or bad or indifferent that is, but it's a beautiful novel of people meeting, converging, drifting. I won't say any more because I'm going to hand over to Mary-Ann now to tell you about this.
Thank you, Penny. Thanks very much. Probably get away with sitting down. No, we'll see. No, I quite like sense of power. Thank you, Penny, and thanks again. It's always such a pleasure working with Seren, and I quite like the fact that Seren is somehow in the title and the publisher's name, which makes it nice. And in fact, it's the title I'd like to start with because, in a sense, it's peculiarly misleading. Starshot sounds slightly like starstruck. It sounds like something that's extremely romantic, slightly mysterious. But in fact, what it is just a pile of gloop. I found some by our pond in one very cold February a few years ago. It looks like frog spawn, but it isn't. It's sort of empty frog spawn. It looks like clumps of silicon just sitting around by the edge of the pond. And in fact, it was Gwyn and I, we were out looking at it, and we thought, this isn't frog spawn, what is it? So we went and started to find out about it. And lo and behold, it turns out that starshot, or star slubber, or the recrement of stars as it's known, has been the subject of a lively debate going back centuries as to whether it is something organic, possibly sicked up by herons and made out of bits of frog, or whether it is actually the trailing remnants of a meteor fallen from the heavens. And there are fantastic 18th century naturalists debating this hot topic. Some of my favourite people, including Thomas Pennant, in fact, discuss it. But the champion, in a sense, of star slubber, starshot, was the anomalies man himself, Charles Fort, who you may have come across in the Fortean Times, that wonderful magazine of all that's weird and wonderful. And for him, it was a definite case of things falling from the sky, of planets and worlds out there of which we know very little. And this stuff that just appears is a kind of way into those worlds. So in a sense, this pile of gloop becomes a quiet symbol of a bridging of those two worlds, because it links us to a crystalline world of stars and paths, the kinds of things that are perhaps causing my characters to cross and meet and bump into each other, but also a rich, complex and profoundly organic world, which is the pond, and which forms a kind of constant counterpoint to the world of the city, which is in itself the subject of the novel. So that's the first object I wanted to tell you about. There are three objects before we kind of move on to people. The other object then performs a similar function. It's a tiny microscopic organism called a radiolarian, and these are beautiful starry little things with these incredibly intricate exoskeletons, and they live in salt water. And they were recorded extensively in the mid-19th century by a scientist called Ernst Haeckel, who's famous for having produced illustrations of them, which sort of burst out of the world of science into the art world. And I think Clive will probably talk a little bit about them. As fossils, they're immensely useful for geologists because they lay down layers. There are so many of them. They're very useful for dating. And in late 19th century Bohemia, a father and son, Leopold and Rudolf Blaschka, managed to create these things, these starry crystalline shapes in glass with a technique which has never since been replicated. And you can see the Blaschka radiolaria in the National Museum in Cardiff. And they again form a bridging object between the world of the pond, the world of water, and the world of the stars that my characters are constantly pulled between. Item 3, much more prosaic, is a park bench, because that was the first thing in my head. It was a bench with a girl on it, a girl intensely aware of a building behind her. And that was the first bench. Lots more followed, and they all join up. When the bench got stuck in my head, I thought it was the beginning of another short story, and I thought that the building was probably the National Library of Wales, which I think is my favourite public building, museums notwithstanding. But the building turned into the museum, the story grew, and the girl turned out to be Myra, and so we'll start with her. She's piled up her dark red hair with a clip, so the building can see the nape of her neck. She puts her bag on the bench beside her and watches the students scattered across the neat grass in the unexpected February sun. They sit and they sprawl. Their bodies relax. But she is taut and tense as a dancer, painfully self-aware. Behind her, masked by branches, are dark windows, thick white pillars, a civic, four-square, symmetrical gaze. The sun brightens everything. It sharpens edges. She slowly loosens a soft cotton scarf from around her neck and sits resolutely facing the town centre, the traffic. She eats her lunch and pretends she cannot feel it. But today she knows she will go back to work content. She has its full attention. She hates being ignored. Deep down, Myra will admit she's still a little embarrassed, if not confused by the whole thing. Not the pull of desire itself. A flame is a flame is a flame, she thinks, at least till it goes out. But the object, so massive, so important. She would have thought herself susceptible to quite other forms. Lost churches, empty warehouses, even some of the new stuff, the big projects, all curves and glass and national slate, blatant but beautiful, mobile pigeon purples and greys. But early 20th century, Portland stone, with the power and the glory of the 19th still running in its white veins. At least, she thinks defensively, at least it's not a multi-storey car park, or a shopping precinct, or a bank. My God, if it had been a bank. It's a public institution, civic-minded. It intends well. She's also relieved to have grown out of the castle. Not even a proper castle, and there's nothing romantic about the proper ones if you stop for a moment to consider them. Barracks, an empty threat. She exempts the stone animals from her scorn, however. They're too much part of her childhood. She can still recite them, walking from town with her mum towards the river. Their frightening eyes. Lions, lynx, lioness, bear, seal, apes, and the anteater, or is it an aardvark? She can never remember which. The new spring sun is lovely on her face and neck. She has a vague sense of crocuses and a squirrel off to the left. Next time, she thinks, she might have to bring sun cream. At last, she checks her phone to see if her time is nearly up. It is. Tensing, she removes her sunglasses and rises from the bench, passing the bronze statue of the pensive little girl, and walking out of the patch of park to meet the building's gaze. The shock of it will carry her most of the 15-minute walk through the traffic and the shoppers under glass, through the derelict patches and the building sites, over the railway bridge, back to work. I'm going to ask Clive Hicks-Jenkins now to come and talk very briefly about how the cover came about, but also perhaps more generally about how his work works in relation to authors and writers, because he's particularly notable for his stunning, not illustrations, but illuminations of other people's work, and I consider myself extremely privileged to be in their midst. The other
It's just a little thing, isn't it? It's not very big. I can't tell you how much thought goes into making the cover of any book, but this one was very special. It didn't come to me as a book that I was making a cover for. It came to me because Mary-Ann is a friend, and we were talking about what she was writing. At one time, you were calling it a novella. Yeah, for want of something to call it. And the first time I read it, it was only partial. It wasn't all there, but it was very enticing. I'm not an illustrator. I'm a painter. I don't say that I'm not an illustrator in any way, using illustrator as a pejorative term. It's not. It's just not what I do. But when you make a cover for a book, you kind of become an illustrator, but it's a word I balk at. Every time I think about the cover of a book, I think of just one word: skin. The cover of the book is its skin. And when we all start talking about what the cover of a book may be, at the point at which creative people get together, it's very hard to pin down any one thing. You have conversations that kind of spin around the edges. I make sketchbooks. I fill them with ideas that I have as I read through the novel or poetry, depending on what it is that I'm making a cover for. But this came to me, not to make the cover, but to make the images inside it, just the little tail pieces to chapters that are tiny. That's what Mary-Ann asked me to do originally. She even told me what to do at one point.
I'll do that again.
She said, oh, well, we could have maybe this plant and that plant, and maybe you could just go along those lines. And so, because she did me a very good favour, a very great favour, I agreed to make the images inside the book. But then somewhere along the line, I kind of slid into doing the cover. It was a very pleasant thing to do, because I've worked with Seren before, making covers for Damien Wolford Davis. But I knew this one was special. And I didn't talk very much to anybody about it, because that's not the way I work. I really need to kind of go quietly into a room and absorb something. And talking about it doesn't make it better for me. Talking about it makes it worse. And so I have a tendency just to go off and be by myself and refuse to talk to anybody, including the author, about what I'm doing, in the hope that somehow lightning will strike and the cover will come together in a way that will suit everybody. When I say that the cover of a book is its skin, this is what I mean. Whatever you put onto the cover of a book, when you're discussing it at the outset, that's not how I see what the cover will be. I think of the cover of a book in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 10 years' time, when it's battered and it's on a shelf or it's on a bedside table or it's left on a seat in a train. The book inhabits its skin. Whatever you've put onto the cover of it, it will grow into. And that's what I believe happens with books, that they grow into their skins, which are their covers. And my partner Peter and I have between us so many paperbacks in the house that we've collected over lifetimes, and some of them have really bad covers that I'm very, very affectionate toward, because they're the covers that were on the books when I first read them, and they became part of the book. And so everything grows into its cover, and this will grow into this cover, regardless of any merit that the cover may or may not have. And that's what I want to happen. I want, when people think about Mary-Ann's book, who bought it in its first edition, will have a mental picture of what it was resting in when they first read it. And that's really what happens with books, and why we become so attached to them. There are so many elements in the book that I could have chosen, picked up on, to put on the cover, but I am a bit perverse and elliptical, and I tend to move away from all of the things that may be considered to be obvious within the book. And I make no apologies for that. I think that for me the cover of a book is like a piece of music. A piece of music, you can give it a name, but a piece of music can't be illustrative. You might be told that it's from the planet Suite. You might think of Venus or Mars, the god of war, when you listen to it, but in fact your mind goes to many different places to a piece of music. And that's what I like to think happens with an image that wraps around a book, that it has a quality, a tone, a flavour that enables you to have some feel for what you think about the book. But there's a mechanical thing that happens too, and it's something that's in my mind always when I'm making the cover for a book. When it's on a shelf, whoever is passing by will be looking at it. Many people who look at this book will come looking for it because they know Mary-Ann, or they've heard a review, or they've read a review, and they feel as though they want to read it. But there will be hundreds more, thousands perhaps, who don't know who she is and don't know her exquisite work. And the only thing that they'll have to go on when they walk past is the cover. So I am like a sort of fairground huckster, calling out and asking people to look and to listen. And I have less than 2 seconds in order to be able to do that. If they don't stop in their tracks, if it doesn't catch their eye, if they don't pick it up, if they don't open it, then I haven't really done my job. And most of the time, probably people won't pick it up. But if I can just get them to the point of picking it up and opening it, and reading just a few lines from anywhere in the book, from the beginning, which is what some people do, or the end, which is what a lot do, or from somewhere in between, I think they'll buy the book. I think they'll be enraptured and captured, and will move on with it in their pocket. And so that's what I feel my job is with a book like this: to catch your attention when you're walking past, not to lie to you, not to promise something that is not going to be delivered. No sex on the cover, no buildings even, no people on the cover. Just something that you can project your imagination into, and then let the author do the rest of the work. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving me the opportunity to work with you. I work with a very, very small number of authors. I don't work with them for the money. I work with them because I just love making images that are associated with words. I love words rather more than images, which is kind of unusual for a painter. So it's given me great pleasure to do it. I know that you're not disappointed with it, I'm sorry if I put you through hell occasionally when I was working on it. But it's been a huge pleasure, and I expect to do the next one.
Thank you very much. If everybody's sitting comfortably, I'll do another couple of little sections from the book. If you want to get to the film, please slide out, because I am not competing with Judi Dench. So as well as being about strange things and alien forms and ponds and the rest of it, it is very much a book about people and about the connections between them. And the benches connect up, if you like, so people start talking to each other, these different characters. And as a kind of inverse pattern, something else is crisscrossing the city. And it's a silence. It's channels and threads of silence which are eating their way between the people and the benches and the buildings all over Cardiff, let's call it. It's not really Cardiff, it's a sort of unreal Cardiff. So the idea of threads connecting people, but also of something corrosive feeding into our society, counterbalance each other. And in this little section, we meet the professor, whose job it is to map everything. He's a map addict, if you like, and he is already mapping every possible way of connecting people, building plants, everything in the universe on his computers. And we'll see what happens. There are 7 screens in his office and a different map on every one. The colours are lovely. The professor walks round and round, stopping for a few seconds in front of each, until he finally sits down at the largest console. He clicks a few times, pulling the maps in one on top of the next, so that they form a palimpsest, like layers of tracing paper. He hasn't seen tracing paper in years. He wonders if it still exists, if people still use it. It was never, he thinks, quite translucent enough. He selects 7 more maps, then 7 more, thickening the layers on the big screen. In any case, here is confirmation. The blankness, eating through the fine lines of every map, is itself a pattern, a new map, one which does not correspond to any of his. The invisible lines, though not quite a perfect match in every layer, form a tracery of nothingness. Strands of it, reaching out like veins and arteries across the city, with tendrils twisting and curling off the main stems. All of them flowing out of what appears to be a pool of emptiness in the middle of the castle. It is, he now knows this for certain, nothing to do with him or any of his team. He's thought of it till now as a virus, a poisonous piece of software with a life of its own, a slow, malicious joke, perhaps, against the new regime by one of those ousted when the changes came a few years back. But words have been coming back to him from the streets, his project workers dropping in by 1s and 2s, quietly baffled, all unsettled, handing over their worm-eaten data and talking uncomfortably of gaps and walls and sudden silences. And he's been out and found them for himself, has listened attentively to the quality of the nothingness. And though it is in many respects a setback for the project as a whole, he must admit he's been secretly pleased to find his maps, his data tools, his programs sensitive enough to pick up something so unplanned for, so utterly impossible to predict. He'll have to get into the castle, it appears. This has not been particularly easy since Butte Co. kindly took it back off the city during the last economic crisis. He remembers going as a child, with his brother, the 2 of them running in mad circles on the grass, urging their mother to take them up the keep, though she said it made her dizzy, horribly dizzy. They were pitiless, and made her climb up after them, scampering feet spiralling up ahead of her. He thinks of her now, holding on to the curve of the rail, forcing her own feet to follow, one step after the other, her desperate anxiety for them chasing on ahead of her, like a hawk after sparrows, oblivious little sparrows, who never felt the rush of her panic and never, ever stopped. The keep is gone now, though, of course. It must look empty in there. He knows enough of the right people, he thinks. He will find a way in. but the chance must not be wasted. This stuff, this silence, must be properly analysed. And as he stands there in the centre of his office, an idea grows inside him as quickly and irresistibly as a smile, and sets his pulse beating, and his slim fingers reaching for his phone, scrolling through the names to find an old, old number. The silence keeps growing and thickening, and actually ends up with quite a noose around the museum. It doesn't actually stop people going in, or it does in some cases stop them going in, but it causes a sense of uneasiness and unpleasantness, which does actually make people turn around and come back again. So numbers are dropping of visitors to the museum, and they've been trying to work out ways to deal with this silence. They've already had an extraordinary parade when they got everybody to play musical instruments and sing and recite Dylan Thomas and do all kinds of things to try and fight the silence with noise. This completely fails to work. So in this last section that I'm going to read you, two characters are speaking. One is Lena, the Syrian refugee, and I have to say, she appeared on the scene when this book was was being written 2 years ago, a long time before such people had such a presence in our lives, and it's been almost frightening to feel her grow in strength in the last 2 years with the events that we've seen. And the other person is Theo, who is a fantastic bloke. I actually have to say, I like all my characters, and I found this really hard because you kind of feel you ought to have good guys and bad guys, and that there ought to be a lot of sort of dynamic tension between them. But actually, they're all really nice people. So the baddie, in a sense, is the invisibleness coming out of the castle. Theo, anyway, is a sort of environmental gorilla, and he is one of the keys in the end to solving some of the problems caused by the silence, which I actually think is probably just a metaphor run wild. So I'll leave you to work that one out for yourself. So Theo has told Lena, who is a microbiologist from Syria, currently working as a cleaner in the hospital, that she needs to go and see the Blashkas that I spoke about at the beginning in the museum. I tried a couple of days ago, she says, but I couldn't get through. I turned back. Stupid. What happened? He asks. Grief, she says. Loss. Hopeless. It didn't seem to matter anymore. And then I didn't think about it at all until this morning. And then I saw you. It's not just you, he says. Don't worry. I've watched dozens of people turn back like that. The woman I know in natural history says visitor numbers have been dreadful. Dan says the university set up some kind of CCTV to record what happens. They interview people. They'll be after you. You watch. She smiles. It didn't work then, the parade. Apparently not. Come on, I'm here now, and I'm going in anyway. I'll help you through. He gives her his arm, and they climb the steps quickly. As they get nearer the top, he puts his arm right around her shoulder and hurries her through. He doesn't let her go until they're in the main hall, under the echoing dome. He watches her look up and around her, astonished. I haven't been anywhere like this for a long time, she says. A long time. It's incredible. Would you like some tea? He asks. I've got 20 minutes before I'm expected. Or would you like me to show you the Blashkas? Are you okay for time? She nods and smiles. Early shift, she says. I'm finished for the day now. Tea would be good. Then I will explore all this. She makes a big gesture. He laughs. Come on then. She doesn't tell him that she hasn't eaten since breakfast at the hostel many hours ago now, that the money for her cheese roll went on the lemons carefully chosen and amicably haggled for at the corner shop. But she lets him buy her a thick slice of lemon cake with almonds, and as the girl at the counter puts it on a white plate, she thinks of the 3 bright lemons left in a white hospital bowl this morning next to the sleeping girl. She imagines her waking. They talk about their work, going almost straight into the finest details, discovering with pleasure how much of a shared language they possess. Her brown eyes are warm. She tells him about being in the States as a young woman, an assistant researcher on a big international project on the radiolaria. He tells her about articles he's seen, developments in the field she knows nothing about. They do not yet, talk about their dead. Theo takes his leave. She has his phone number. She must ring him soon, he says. He points her towards natural history. Past the stuffed animals and up the stairs, he says. Good luck. Alone again, she feels daunted. She stands for a moment, a small figure in a dark tunic and headscarf, collecting herself beneath that huge ceiling. Then, on an impulse, heads up the grand flight of stairs to the right, to the art galleries. There she drifts unsystematically, letting herself be drawn by colours, by faces, looking only occasionally at the labels. A handful of medieval Madonnas, each with child. The women are lovely, though most of the babies are unconvincing, one or two almost grotesque. But she finds one she likes, a sweet-faced girl, holding a boy who reminds her of Teddy, soft, curly blonde hair, laughing. His mother must have been fair, she thinks. Dan is quite dark. She moves on through other galleries. Castles, a whole wall of them, from all over Wales. Cardiff's looks lovely, she thinks, all trees and water where the road should be, and a man sitting in the dust with his dog, and a woman hanging out her washing to flap against the walls. Another room. Rodin's naked lovers unsettle her, and a few of the Impressionists make her want to stop. She climbs a small flight of stairs to see where it goes, and finds a big wooden door with a sign on it. Oriel Galatea. Galatea Gallery, closed. Argai. She comes back down a different way into a room full of modernist portraits, all of them, apparently, staring at her. And suddenly feeling she's had enough of Western tradition and its obsession with the human form, hurries through 2 more rooms and down a short corridor to emerge with relief into a world of plants and creatures. 5 minutes later, she has found the Blashkas. The pictures she remembers seeing many years ago in a book do not come close. Inside the glass case, glass creatures, her creatures, 1,000,000 times magnified, exquisite, strange, and so familiar she cannot help the tears in her eyes. She blinks them away and circles the case in complete wonder. Reads blurrily how they were created by the Blashkas, Leopold and Rudolf, father and son, in late 19th century Bohemia, how their techniques have never since been reproduced. And there, centre stage, is the actinota heliosphera, the fretted glass sphere, with irregular rays like slender spears of ice, crystalline, uncanny. More than ever, she thinks, more even than under the microscope, they look like entities from the farthest depths of space, from the stars. Oh, I wish you could see them, Ali. Can you see them? I wish you were here now, my husband. I wish you could see this. And because she doesn't want to frighten the beautiful young man sitting discreetly against the wall in the attendant's chair, and because she is on the verge of something worse than tears, she hurries down the stairs, through the galleries, past groups of primary school children in the busy main hall, and out down the steps, through the shiver of silence, to find a bench where she can put her head in her hands and weep. Yeah.